Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Fact versus Fake. How do you know what information to trust? Before we get going and before I turn things over to Julia, just wanted to remind everyone who's following along tonight, if you have any questions or comments, just type them in to the comments bar on either platform, Facebook or YouTube, and we will get to them potentially within the presentation, but there's a lot of stuff to cover, more likely, definitely at the end. So the only thing I would ask is that not everyone's going to have the same point of view always. That's just kind of a given. And, it doesn't matter whether you are liberal or conservative, whether you side with yourself as being Democratic or Republican. The main thing is that everyone really holds their feelings on this matter very close to them. So the main thing we have to remember is try and listen to what other people have to say and be respectful of other people's opinions and their points of view. You may not agree with them, but they're just as valid as anything that you might have to say. So, not to be terribly preachy, I realize that I may have come off a little preachy there, but just be respectful of each other. And at this point, I would like to turn things over to our presenter this evening, Julia Lee. Take
Hello.
It away, Julia.
Thank you so much, Tim. That was a lovely, lovely introduction. And before we get started with fact versus fake, I do want to mention that, we're going to be talking about facts tonight. And facts are wonderful because they have no political side, and everybody is guilty of misinformation, and everybody is guilty of bias of some sort. So, facts are lovely because they aren't a political issue. It's just kind of the whole presentation is about how we can evaluate sources and how you can evaluate if the information you are reading, whether it's news, whether it's just a Google search, whether you're just looking up information, how do you know what's actually credible and verified? And how do you know what sources to look up your information? I think we've all heard, I used to be an English teacher before I was a librarian, and I always told my kids, don't use Wikipedia as a resource. It's not a credible resource. Does that mean I'm going to tell you don't ever read Wikipedia? Of course not. I browse Wikipedia all the time. But if you're going to look to Wikipedia to get the hard facts, there are some things to know about the resource, which is, it's not verified information. Pretty much anybody can write anything on Wikipedia, which is why I'd always tell my kids, don't use that as a resource for a paper. You're going to want to look at sources that are verified and written by professionals and vetted by professionals. So a lot of these tips are ones that I used to give to my high school English kids when they were doing their resource. And they really apply to everyone, especially since a lot of people get their information online and from social media nowadays. And the cards are really stacked against us as consumers because unless you're willing or you're aware of needing to do more information, a lot of people see something and go, oh my gosh, this is true. And so I'm trying to help people by giving them tools to really critically analyze and critically think about where they're getting their information from, just so you can be a more conscientious consumer and know that the information you're getting is based on facts. So hopefully these will be useful tips for everybody. So Tim, thank you for being my PowerPoint guy.
You're quite welcome.
Yes, and I think we're ready to get started. So
we
fact
definitely
versus
are.
fake. How do you know an information trust, and how do you know what sources are verified? How do you know that the information that you're looking at, that you're consuming, is based on fact? So we're going to go into, first of all, who am I to be talking about information? Well, my name is Julia, as Tim said, and I hold an MLIS, which is a Master of Library and Information Sciences. Yes, I have a master's degree, and a lot of what we covered in Library and Information Sciences is research methodology, which is a lot more exciting than it sounds. I loved all my research methodology classes, my data and metadata classes, and so librarians really focus on facts and finding those verified sources and helping people do research. I did teach English for a while. I was a high school English teacher. So again, I helped kids write research papers. A lot of these same tips I use in this presentation. I got my graduate degree from the UW Milwaukee, which is a School of Information Sciences. Shout out, go Panthers. And I am the Youth Services Manager at Manitowoc Public Library. I'm ready for my next slide, Tim. All right, so how we're going to really talk about evaluating news sources. So I do want to take a pause and say what this presentation is and what it isn't. This presentation is going to aim to give you resources so you can critically evaluate information. It's going to give you tools. What this presentation is not, I am not going to sit here and say what resources you should use and what resources you shouldn't. As a librarian, you will never hear me say you shouldn't read that. Those words are never going to come out of my mouth. So this presentation is not going to give you a list of resources you should read and resources you shouldn't read. No way. I want to make sure everybody can read any of the information they want, but I'm also going to give you the tools so you can critically analyze those sources. So when we talk about evaluating news sources, it is surprisingly a contentious issue. People have their favorite news sources and they really don't like to be told that their news is untrustworthy. I have a really interesting Pew Research study that I'm going to share later in this presentation that kind of gets more into that. But it is a contentious issue because people really hold their news sources dear. And while we're talking about evaluating news sources, we're going to talk about two different things, news gathering and news analysis. And I want to kind of define what those two things are because they are very different. So news gathering is where news organizations do all the investigative journalism work. They call sources, and then they check facts and they get the facts of a story. So the example I have here is getting the facts of Bernie Sanders and how he was involved in the passage of several bills. Okay, so that's like the basic information. They're getting the facts and gathering these facts. Now, where the news sources differ is news analysis. That's when the organizations take those facts and they put them into a larger narrative. And depending on the bias of the organization, the story can be completely different. For example, one side might say, hey, Senator Sanders is largely effective based on the same facts. Another news source might use the analysis that the same person is ineffective. So that's where we really differentiate with news sources. The news gathering is based on the same facts, but the analysis is where different resources can be biased one way or another. Ready for my next one, Tim? All right, so what do I mean by bias? So I want to just take a quick second to define some terms. Tim will have to kind of click through these to, hey, there we go, to animate. So when we say unbiased, if you're strictly talking about an unbiased source, they're going to report the news and the facts objectively. They're going to tell you this is what happened according to this source. And they're not going to take a spin on it. It's going to be pretty cut and dry. You know, this person said this is what happened at this time. Very factual, very to the point, not very emotional. But then we get to slanted, which is where resources and sources can start to use that analysis to change the conversation. If a news source is slanted, it knows what its audience is, and it tells you what you already know. So it's going to take those facts, right? But it's going to lean it slightly toward your viewpoint or the viewpoint of the resource. So it is going to slightly favor one side or another in its story. It's going to try to make it look either slightly favorable or slightly disfavorable. And then the bias sources, they tell their audience what they want to hear. So they take the facts and they tell almost a completely different story. They kind of spin the facts so it tells the story they want the facts to tell. And they add a lot of emotional punch to these stories. So in the end, it almost doesn't matter what the original facts were. The story is so skewed to tell their audience what they want to hear. So these are the three types of sources we generally talk about when we talk about, getting your information from a verified source. An unbiased source is going to be pretty much cut and dry, not going to add much emotion. You're going to get the facts and who said it. A slanted source is going to shine a favorable light either on one side or the other, and biased is going to spin that story until it tells their audience what they want to hear. So that's what we mean by unbiased, slanted, and biased. I'm going to use those terms a lot tonight, so I just want to make sure you have a little familiarity with what those mean, especially biased, because I'm going to give some examples of some extreme bias in just a few slides. So I think I'm ready for the next one, Tim. A lot of what we're going to talk tonight comes from the International Federation of Library Associations. If you notice on most of my slides, I'm going to source credit my slides like a good librarian. So you can go back and click on those links and find out more information if you like, because you should always critically evaluate your sources. So a lot of the tips tonight is going to come from this wonderful infographic that was put out by the International Federation of Library Associations. It's some tips on how you can critically analyze the information you are consuming. So this is just a lovely infographic, and the next half hour or so, we're going to go kind of step by step through these tips and how it can help you be a more conscientious consumer of media. So I think we're ready to go into our first tip, which is consider the source. So if you're reading a headline, one way to really dig into whether this information is trustworthy or not is to click away from the story to investigate the site, its mission, and its contact information. So in the next couple slides, I'm going to give you examples of two extreme opposites that show quite a bias. And I'm going to point out how you can see bias and how it's being used in these stories. So if we click to the next slide, it'll be my first example. So if I go on this website and I see this headline, if you're looking, it says Dr. Doom is crossed off, and then there's Dr. Snake. And I love those little like snake infographics that are even put in there. And if you look at the wording that is used, there's really emotional wording here. And besides doom and snake, it clearly wants you to think one way or another about this individual. It's talking about stabbing somebody in the back. It really evokes a powerful emotional response. If I click, and I clicked around this site, okay, so I see these headlines and they're pretty emotional. They're showing me that it really wants me to form an opinion about this person even before I read the headline. So I did a little bit clicking around the site. Tim, if you wouldn't mind clicking. There we go. So I went into, they had a store. And if you see what the products they're selling, it clearly shows a bias toward one pool of thought, toward a conservative pool of thought. So just knowing that, clicking around the site, you can see like, okay, knowing that this site has this bias, I can see how that affects how they're presenting the news, how they're analyzing the news. They're taking these facts, but then they're adding that emotional language, and they're trying to get their audience to come to a conclusion about the individual based on the bias that they have. So then I have a complete opposite other example of bias from the other side. If you wouldn't mind clicking through, Tim. All right, so this site, again, we see some really powerful emotional words in these. We have enraged statements. And another headline is about how a news reporter looks like they're really upset at a sixth grader for making a statement. And it clearly is trying to get you to think one way or another about the individuals, and especially about the other political side. So knowing that and seeing, especially like one, if you can see the top, that toolbar or the menu bar says extremism, it really wants you to form an opinion on a certain issue before you even read the material. So that to me is a red flag. This site is probably well, not probably. This site is using that emotional language, so it's showing a bias. So if I click around, which go to the next slide, and I find out what the site's mission is, I can see that, okay, this site clearly does have a bias to the exact opposite side that our last example had, but it definitely has a bias toward liberal train of thought, and it's going to put the conservative individuals and the conservative train of thought in a negative light, which we could see they use that emotional wording to really get their audience to pre-formulate ideas about something before they even read the stories. So to me, the past two examples are pretty much on the same level of resources. I can clearly see a bias there, and it's going to affect how they present the information. Now, just to clarify, am I telling you never read these sources? No, that's not what I'm saying. As a librarian, I want you to read whatever you want to read. I'm just, again, giving you those tools. If you are consuming information from one of these sites, to just be aware that they are going to put a biased spin on things, and that's going to affect how they present the information. Ready for the next one, Tim? All right, so other things to look for as you're considering the source. Look for unusual URLs. If they end with something that looks kind of funny, like l-o or .com.co, chances are they aren't legitimate news sites. Now, we see this a lot on social media, actually, and it can be kind of tricky. Because sometimes you see on social media, oh, donate to the rainforest relief efforts. And if you click on some of those links, it might take you to a site that looks like it's a legitimate nonprofit. But if it has a strange URL, it might not be a legitimate nonprofit. So beyond just gathering news sites, just take a look at those URLs to make sure that nothing looks strange, because that can be a real red flag. Number 2 is dissect the layout. Look for grammatical errors, incorrect dates, bold claims with no sources, or again, that really emotional wording, and sensational images, kind of like the extreme examples I just gave. Those are all red flags that a source, again, is going to, the bias is going to affect the information that they present. Number 3 is dig deeper. Find out who wrote the article that you're reading and who supports the site, the mission of the site. If the information doesn't exist, or if you need to register to get it, start questioning why they're not more upfront about who is writing these articles, who is supporting these sites. Number 4 is cross-check. I use this all the time. Use fact-checking sites to confirm information, or see if other credible news outlets are reporting similar news. So I usually go by the rule of 3. If I see a news article out there, and I share this with my family and friends all the time, they see a headline and they're like, "Oh my gosh, this is crazy! Check out this headline. This is a new sensational news." I usually go, I'm going to check at least 3 other sites, different news sites, because if it's really big news, all of the big news outlets you're going to bet they're going to have a story on it. So just make sure those stories are similar across the line. And if you cross-check and you find that, yep, okay, this checks out, they're all reporting very similar information, then you can know that it is verified. And then number 5, try a reverse image search. This is a really cool one. If the same picture appears in unrelated stories, you may have a reason to be suspicious. Now, this is especially something like a biased site might use an image, but kind of twist how you interpret the image. So if you see the image portrayed in one light in one story, and you see the image portrayed in another light in another story, that will give you reason to question the validity of how that image is being used. Okay, this is another big one. Read beyond the headlines. Oh my goodness, everybody sees clickbait out there. Headlines are designed to be inflammatory. They're designed to be eye-catching, but it really is important to click beyond the headline. And I know we're all guilty of seeing headlines on social media and be like, "Oh my gosh, that's crazy." And you might share it right away before reading beyond that headline. But oftentimes, the more outrageous a headline is, the more you should read the story, because oftentimes the story is very different from how the headline kind of dramatizes it. So we'll go to, yep. So this is a great example that I found. 4 dangerous species that swim in Lake Michigan's waters. And it's a picture of piranhas. And I found this and I was like, oh my gosh, there's a picture of piranhas. Are piranhas in Lake Michigan? If that's really what the headline and the picture wants you to think. Piranhas in Lake Michigan, it's crazy. But I want you to really look at where this piranha story is coming from. If you look up at the top, it's from some guy's blog. It's called the Livin' Fresh blog. And the person who wrote this is in marketing, and he sells a coast-to-coast line of products. So this person is writing this really inflammatory, exciting headline about Lake Michigan and the dangerous species that live in there, and used an image of a piranha to get you to go to his blog and to check out his products. And if you read beyond the headline, you can see that we can click on to the next one, Tim. Sorry, thought I had another slide there. If you read beyond the headline, it actually says nope, piranhas have never actually been spotted in Lake Michigan, but they could be. So again, it's a guy writing a blog and the headline is outrageous. Are there piranhas living in Lake Michigan? No, there are not piranhas living in Lake Michigan, but this person really wanted you to check out his blog, really wanted to get your attention, so he used the image of piranhas. And again, he's not a marine biologist, it's a guy writing a blog. So being aware of where you're getting that information from and then reading beyond the headline. Don't worry, there's no piranhas in Lake Michigan. We can go to the next one, Tim. Thank you. Okay. So it kind of ties back to my last example. Check the author again with that guy writing the blog about piranhas in Lake Michigan. Who was that guy? Turns out he was in marketing. He was writing a blog for his company, trying to promote his products. He was not a marine biologist. He was actually a person who could scientifically write about that topic. So something that you can do is doing a quick search on the author. Are they credible? And are they a real person? Is another big question to ask. So we can go on to the next slide, Tim. So one thing when you're reading information, expect accountability. We really want to make sure that we are looking close at the byline. And the byline, when I say that, I mean, it's just simply where a person puts their name and to the article. They take credit for the information. So accountable sources sign their stories and they take personal responsibility for the content. If you're reading an article and there is no author, that is a big red flag that they are not putting their name to the information. They're not taking accountability. Again, articles should have bylines. Another word for the name of the author, an individual, group, or individuals who take personal and professional responsibility for the accuracy of the information in the article. Again, not having one is a big red flag. If they have a byline and they hyperlink, click on it. If it's linked, where does it lead? Does it lead to an actual person? And check out if they have a LinkedIn account, a LinkedIn profile. What are the other things that this person has read? Do they have a history of writing really biased or inflammatory material? Do they have a degree or some kind of professional background in which they are a credible source for this information? So again, doing just a little bit of research, clicking on those links if they give you a link will tell you a lot about the person who wrote that article, and that can be really important and a big red flag, especially if there is no byline or author associated with that article. I'm ready for the next one, Tim. All right. I feel like this would be me if I went to like any sort of speech. I'd be the person holding up, cite your sources for any statements that are being made, because I'm a big old nerd like that. But the supporting sources in articles are really important. If an article has links, they're saying like, oh, they're pulling a statistic, especially for statistics. If they're making a statement or pulling a statistic and they link a source, click on those links. Do they actually go somewhere? And does that article or does that source back up what people are saying in that article? That's really important. A lot of times with biased sources or even slanted sources, if you click on that link, sometimes that link will not back them up, or it's a really old article. This just happened to me this week. I was reading an article and they credited a news article, and I clicked on that link. The news article was from 2011, and they were using it to try to back up a claim that they were making. That's 10 years ago. And that information is really had nothing to do with the statements they were making. So that's really important. If they do supply those links, click on them, see where they go, and make sure that information actually backs up what that person is saying. I have an example of a really good one in the next slide. So this is from a BBC News World article, and I highlighted where they're citing their sources. You can see in every single paragraph, they say exactly where they found their information. An Indian Army statement, a source told the Times of India, China's foreign ministry spokesman. So they are crediting every single statement they are making, which is a really good sign. So if they are crediting who is saying these statements, they're backing it up, they're saying where they got their sources from. That's a really good example of how people are citing their sources and making sure that that information is available for you. I'm ready for the next one. Okay. Again, I kind of went over this just in my last example, but checking the date can be really important. This happens a lot on social media. You might see your friend post something, oh, this is outrageous, I can't believe this. And then you click on, you're like, oh my gosh, click on the article and it's from 5 years ago, But just checking the date is so important. You know, we get so sucked into the headline, we get so sucked into the story, we can miss, oh, that is not actually relevant information for today. It seems really simple, but it happens all the time. It can really trip us up. And that's a really simple thing you can do to just verify that that date is accurate and relevant to current events. The example on the next page was pretty famous a couple of years ago. So there was a story after the 2016 election, after Trump won the election, that Ford shifts its truck production from Mexico to Ohio. And I think it happened on, actually, it originated on a blog. Someone took this news story and started circulating it and giving it credit to President Trump for getting the production moved from Mexico to Ohio. But if you look at the original date, I don't know if you guys can see it, but it was from August 17th, 2015, which was before the 2016 election. So obviously, Trump was not the president back then, and he could not be credited for moving the production from Mexico to Ohio. But somebody, I think, again, it started on somebody's blog. Again, not a very credible source for information. This person actually retitled the article and changed the date, which is also copyright infringement. But that's a whole nother story. So the original article was from 2015, which was before the election, which totally changes how this is relevant to current events. So again, checking that date and verifying that that is when the story is from really sheds a completely different light on that story. Just a good example of how checking the date is so important. All right, and is it a joke? This might seem simple, but it can be kind of tricky. Satire is not always easy to identify. Like this news headline, which is pretty outrageous. Tim, if you can click, guess where it came from? The Onion. I think The Onion is one of the most recognizable satire news sources in the world. So satire, it's a joke. It's not serious, but sometimes it can be trickier to identify than this headline, which is obviously outrageous. But sometimes it's a joke. So just kind of verifying, again, check into that source. Is it a satirical site or is it an actual news source? And I have another example on the next slide. So this is kind of tricky. Most people have heard about The Onion as a satirical source, but the World News Daily Report, it has this infographic, news you can trust, on its website. But Tim, if you click to the next slide, it also has a disclaimer at the bottom of the page that it's not responsible for any incorrect or inaccurate information, and it is satirical in nature. So even though it says news you can trust, if you don't know it's satirical, that might confuse you, because at the bottom it says it is satirical and it's not responsible for inaccurate information. But if you didn't know that, if you didn't hunt around the site, you might not be aware that that website is satirical in nature. So just to make you aware, again, clicking away from the headlines, checking out the source is so important, and then you can find out, is it really, if it sounds outrageous, it might be a joke. We can go to the next slide, Tim. This one is probably the most difficult tip to check your biases. Biases. It's really difficult to do, to kind of step back, because we inherently like hearing information that backs up what we believe. We're humans, and that's kind of how we're programmed to be. But if we can step back and consider if our own beliefs are affecting our judgment in evaluating the source, that can go a long way to finding, evaluating whether the information is true or not. Go on the next slide, Tim. So when I say bias, what do I mean when I say bias? It's a tendency to believe that some people, ideas, etc., are better than others, which often results in treating some people unfairly. There are different kinds of bias. Explicit bias refers to attitudes and beliefs, whether they're positive or negative, that we consciously or deliberately hold and express about a person or a group. A lot of times explicit bias is political in nature. Not all the time, but that's just one example of an explicit bias. People are very aware of their bias, and they're very, very conscious of it. So implicit bias is a little trickier. This is attitudes and beliefs, either positive or negative, that occur outside of our conscious awareness and control, which do affect our opinions and our behavior. Everybody has implicit bias. We're humans, we have implicit bias. Even people who try to remain objective, like journalists, have bias. However, just because we all have implicit bias doesn't mean we can't work to fight against it. Just being aware that you have implicit bias and step back, okay, you know what? I bet I'm judging this a little more harshly because of my bias for or against this. So just being aware of your bias and that you have those can go a long way to just kind of help you step back and more objectively analyze things. Confirmation bias is something that we see a lot in news gathering and information sources. It's our subconscious, which wants to seek information and evidence that affirms our beliefs and our ideas and our expectations. So this one's tricky because as humans, we want to seek information that tells us we're right. You know, we want the information that backs us up, which is why those bias sites can be really appealing because they're telling us what we want to hear, but they're not telling us accurate information, which is where it can be very dangerous. So confirmation bias is both affected by and feeds our implicit bias, and it's entrenched around those beliefs and ideas that we're really strongly emotionally attached to, which is why we're so strongly attached to our news sources. And again, if you really have a favorite news source, I never am telling you not to read or consume any sort of information. Just be aware if it's biased that it might be affecting how it's presenting the information for you. And if you're aware of it, then that can go toward you having more of an objective view of that information and maybe seeking out other sources in addition to the biased source to kind of figure out, okay, where the facts really lie. So if we go to the next one, I think this is my Pew Research one. Yes, I found this is kind of fuzzy. Sorry if it's not easy to read. The Pew Research Center is phenomenal. I love the Pew Research Center. They do a lot of really fantastic social research. And when we're talking about confirmation bias, now people are really strongly attached to their news sources. I thought this was really interesting. So if you look to see, the top graph kind of shows you if you trend liberal or conservative, which news sources you trust, okay? And then if you go to the bottom, if you're liberal or conservative, which sources you distrust. And I think it's really interesting. It says a lot about where we are as society because the sources one side trusts, they almost equally distrust for the other side, and vice versa. So the source that the liberals trust the most, the conservatives are going to distrust the most. And the source that conservatives trust the most, the liberals are going to distrust the most. And I think that just shows how polarizing our information gathering even is, and how polarized our society is, and how critical these just knowing how to evaluate information sources, because again, those bias sources are going to tell you what you want to hear, and they're going to feed to those implicit biases. So just being aware that we have bias and knowing how to critically evaluate news sources is going to go a long way in finding out the facts of a story, and really helping hopefully foster more conversation with everybody. We can go to the next slide. So another tip is ask the experts. Hello! We're the Manitowoc Public Library, and we like facts, and we love connecting people with research. That is our website at the bottom of the page. And at manitowoclibrary.org, we have some really fantastic sources that you can access for free. So one thing I would always tell my students, my English students, when they're writing the papers, is to use databases. And what databases are is, if you do a Google search, you're going to get a lot of responses if you type in, penguins. I want to do some research about penguins. How do you know what are the true facts about penguins, and how do you know what are not true facts about penguins? That's the real question here. It can give you a million results for penguins, but it might not give you accurate information. So the difference between a Google search and a database is a collection of scholarly articles and peer-reviewed information that has been gathered and vetted. So these sources have been vetted and verified as accurate information. So if you go to a database, you can browse for information on lots of topics. Now, usually you have to pay for a subscription to a database, but your public library's got your back. You can use these databases for free with your library card. And we have, let's say you want to do some you want to do some research on COVID-19. There's so much information out there about COVID-19. How do you know what is accurate information? Or you want to do some research on the COVID-19 vaccine. How do you know what scientific or accurate information you have? You can search our databases. We do have some health databases, and you can read scientific, scholarly, verified articles on these topics and more. We also have access to something called BadgerLink, which was Wisconsin's online library, which compiles hundreds of databases of hundreds of different topics. It's amazing. And all of these, that are included in the databases have been verified and vetted and peer reviewed. So it can really help you get good information, accurate information. And if you've never used BadgerLink before, if you've never used one of our databases, please do visit manitowoclibrary.org. We do have databases I believe you can find under the research tab. And we've got tons of different databases you can check out. I highly recommend BadgerLink. Again, it combines a lot of different databases, including EBSCOhost, which is one of my favorite for doing research. So you can find accurate information. And if you've never used it before, or you're not really sure how to go about searching in a database, because it is different from Google, talk to your friendly neighborhood librarians. We'd love to help you do research on topics. Come on down, give us a call. You can even shoot us an email if you need help doing research on a topic. And we'd love to compile some information for you and help you get the information that you need. We can go to the next slide. Okay, 4 reliable news fact-checking sites. Now, I got this list from Cornell University. So personally, I have not used all of these fact-checking sites, but I'm going to be like LeVar Burton here from Reading Rainbow. Don't take my word for it. Check them out yourselves and evaluate them. So this list I got from a verified source, Cornell University. You can see my source at the bottom of the slide. It's lovely. But these are 4 fact-checking websites that Cornell University recommended. So if you're reading the news and you want to know right away, instantaneously, like, oh my goodness, I wonder if this is accurate or not, factcheck.org, I have personally used before, and it's a wonderful source to just see, like, okay, so how accurate is this? So there are fact-checking sites out there that you can use to verify if how biased is the news that you're reading, or is this headline, is this information accurate? So there are some sites out there that you can use to fact check news, which is kind of handy. And go to the next one. Okay. So what can you do about fake news? There's a lot of misinformation out there. And just to clarify, fake news is not news you don't like, right? There are a lot of facts that you might not like in the world, but they're facts. Fake news is misinformation, is not accurate information. That's what I mean when I say fake news. Not news you don't like, it's actually not factual. So what can you do about it? Because it's everywhere on social media. The internet abounds with it. What you can do is learn, use these skills today to put into action. Learn to recognize those fake news sites. If they've got those weird URLs, be very cautious of that. And be curious and actively investigate your news stories. If something seems outrageous, if something seems too crazy to be true, or too good to be true, too bad to be true, go and cross-reference those news sources. Use a fact-checking site. Ask your local librarians for help to do research. And really be curious and don't just take it at face value. Use news sources that are accountable for their content. Again, they've got those bylines, and that follow journalistic ethics and standards. Use care before sharing news content with others on social media. If you feel like something is evoking a really big emotional response to you, maybe you just need to take a step back for a second and reflect on what source it's coming from, the language they're using, and again, do a little more investigation before you just share. And then again, learn to recognize your own bias. We all have them. We all have them, and compensate for them. So take a step back and realize if your bias is affecting how you're consuming your media. All right, some more simple tips to stop information. Again, I mentioned that rule of 3. If you read about something on a news source, check at least 3 other major credible news sources to verify information. If it's a big news story, all the outlets are going to be reporting on it. Are they going to be reporting the same? No. So that news analysis comes into play, but now you have some tools to help you with knowing if it's a biased source, slanted source, or unbiased. Watch those URLs. This one has been circulating quite a bit. abcnews.com.co is not abcnews.com. So be very careful about those URLs. Fake news sites, those really, those sites that are going to be rife with misinformation might have a really strange URL. Sources that I would recommend, .edu, .gov, or .org are generally where I go, my go-tos when I'm looking up information. Now, I'm going to say with a caveat, that doesn't mean they're perfect. You're still going to want to use your news evaluating tools that we talked about in the presentation. So just because it says .org doesn't mean it's going to be perfect and you can use it and it's not going to be biased. But generally, those are the URLs that I will start with when I'm doing a search. Again, check your emotions. If something's getting you really upset, it's probably written in a way that's meant to get you upset. That's what the writer is trying to go for, get you to think about an issue a certain way. So just check your emotions and consider the facts. And if you're going to challenge something, totally fine. People have different opinions, and that's all good. It's what makes our society so strong. But just challenge respectfully. If we can have conversations around different opinions, then the world will be a better place. All right. Again, challenging respectfully. Just one final word on that. The problem with fake news is the cultural narrative that it supports. The worst kind of fake news gets people discussing the implications of something that isn't true. So the right kind of way to talk about things is to foster some discourse where it's okay to challenge what others say without the conversation immediately devolving into a shouting match. So challenging respectfully and really focusing on getting to the truth and the facts is such a better way to foster conversation than shouting or again discussing implications of things that aren't true. So if you use those tools to help you kind of evaluate your information, you'll be able to have a conversation that's backed up and based on facts and have a conversation that opens up to more discourse. And the more truth that gets spread around, the better we will be. And I think the rest of my slides are my work, of course, because I'm a librarian. I have my works cited, so you can click on all these links if you want the presentation. Check out where I got my information from, and be curious. And I hope the tools in this presentation can help with you evaluating news sources. Again, as a consumer media, the deck is stacked against us a little bit with the internet. The internet is a great and fabulous tool, but it also means that anyone can pretty much shoot anything out, write anything out there. I think the old caveat that I was always given in school was anyone can call themselves a doctor on the internet, and that's so true. So it puts extra responsibility on the consumer to just be aware and to be curious and do research. So I hope that today you just go away with a couple more tools to help you evaluate news sources, to help you evaluate searches, and to just help you know how to find credible resources. So as always, your public library is here for you. If you ever need help with research, please do check out our databases. They're available on our website. And have fun, be curious, and do your research. I hope you guys enjoyed today.
Thank you so much, Julia. I am now going to move to a couple of questions and comments that we got during your presentation. I thought better to hold off until the end of it. So let me just switch over to a slightly different view. Since you're the person being asked the question, you get to focus. So,
oh boy.
I know, it's very exciting. But this first one, a perfect example of bias and slanted would be cable and network news. Now, what do you agree, disagree with that? And if so, are there any sources that you would consider to be good cable and network news sources that aren't slanted or biased?
I would say You can use these tools for TV just like you can use the internet. Absolutely, there are biased and slanted cable and network news sources. Absolutely. I hesitate to tell people what sources I prefer and what sources I don't prefer. So I'm not going to give you a list of sources that are perfect and sources that are bad. What I will say is, yes, cable and network news sources can be biased and slanted, just like a source you would find on the internet. So please do use the tools that we talked about today. Check to see if they're using that inflammatory language. Are they citing their sources? Are they using inflammatory language to evoke a certain response? Are they using the facts and stating the facts? Or are they telling a narrative that is completely different from what the facts actually are? All of the tips we use today absolutely can be used to evaluate TV sources. And I would say, be curious. Absolutely question TV sources the same way you would question internet sources, and use that rule of 3 to verify. And this can be tricky because there are very biased sources out there across the board.
Certainly,
but
yeah.
If 3 different sources, if you see something on TV, you might want to do some research. Like, okay, so I saw this story on the news and on this cable show. I wonder how true that is, and do your search and cross-check. Or using one of those fact-checking sites can also help. So I agree. Cable and network news can be guilty of bias and slant. Absolutely, they can be. Not necessarily, I'm not saying everyone is, but absolutely they can be just as guilty as the internet. So use those tools that we talked about today to help you critically evaluate those sources. And that can help you know, like, okay, I feel like, it's giving me a really strong emotional response. This is probably going to be biased, and I might need to go to another source to investigate what the story is going on here and to fact check. So that's what I would recommend.
Yeah, and I don't want, not to sound too terribly old, but, I definitely have noticed from when I was a kid, and it was Walter Cronkite and Dan Rather presenting the news, to what is presented on the news now, not to mention the 24/7 news cycle, it has changed drastically, since I've been paying attention to it. And I think, it's important to always, like you've been saying, hone your critical thinking and don't just hear one thing and accept it.
Mm-hmm. Be curious,
yeah.
And just remember that these shows and these resources, these sites, they're businesses, and they're trying to get an audience. So a bias site is going to, especially as bias sites, are going to really be trying to seek an emotional response for their audience. And be aware of the confirmation bias. As humans, we want to hear information that confirms what we believe. But that doesn't mean that it's true. So use those evaluating tools to really critically analyze news from whatever source that you're consuming news from or information from. It could just be a Google search, right? Could be a Google search on, I don't know what. Okay, so I did a foraging program. What plants are safe to eat? You really want to make sure you're getting accurate information when you're doing foraging, for example, right? So it's not just necessarily news. Critically analyze all the information you're getting from, whether it's TV or based on the internet. So I think that brings up a good point. And, I feel like I am LeVar Burton from Reading Rainbow. Don't take my word for it. Go out and critically analyze these sources, use these tools, and be a more mindful consumer of media.
Will you be guest hosting Jeopardy anytime soon?
If I could co-guest host with LeVar Burton, that'd be amazing.
Well, let's see what we can do. This brings up a comment that comes later, and I'm not going to dig for it just because I don't want to lose a place. But you brought up Google searching. Is Google searching something that's valid? Is it slanted one way more towards the right or left, or do you think in your estimation, is Google a non-slanted, unbiased source?
Google itself is a search engine, and it's based on algorithms to get you the most hits, to get you information. So Google's algorithms, I can't speak to because I'm not that familiar with Google's algorithms. What I will say is a quote that I've heard about the internet before, that it's the biggest library in the world, but all the books are on the floor and there's no librarian to help you. So you can get all these fantastic hits, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's the information you're looking for, or B, that it's accurate. So again, I would just be very critical of any search. Google searching is very easy, but again, you're not going to want to trust Wikipedia necessarily as a verified source. Do I use it for casual browsing? Sure. Like I'm not saying Wikipedia is a terrible thing and never use it. Absolutely not. Like I said, as a librarian, I'm never going to tell you not to read stuff. But just being aware, using the tools, I'm going to just keep going back to this, use the tools to critically analyze those Google searches. Feel free to use whatever search engine you're most comfortable with, but just use those tools to evaluate your information when you are sifting through all the search results that Google has provided you.
Okay, this is a comment more than a question or even asking an opinion. It's from Natasha Khan. Super informative. Thanks, Julia and MPL, for doing this. You're welcome, Natasha. Thank you for watching. Which we won't dwell on that, but we'll go on to a question. I know you brought this up, but I think it bears repeating again. What are your recommendations for good fact-checking sites that aren't biased?
I have personally used factcheck.org. Which I have found to be very helpful. But I know in the presentation, Cornell University did recommend those 4 fact-checking sites, which I think if you request, Tim, can people request the PowerPoint?
Oh, they definitely can.
Perfect.
I was going to ask you that after the question and answer period. If you would like a copy of the PowerPoint, just email me. My email address is tgudzinski@manitowoc.org. Once we get through the questions, I'll scroll that at the bottom again if you wanted to write it down and you don't know how to spell Gudzinski, and I'm not going to, take up time doing it now. But yeah, if people would like the PowerPoint, please email me.
Yeah, because there's, like I said, I took that list from Cornell University, again, very good verifiable source. And those were the top 4 for their fact check sites. And I personally have used factcheck.org in the past, but Cornell University recommending those 4 sites, I can say that is the verified source I took it from. So I would recommend exploring any of those sites and seeing if they work for your needs.
There have been a lot of comments, and more comments than questions, but essentially asking your opinion on and what you felt about, like, if a story is super sensationalistic, either on one side or the other, and it doesn't matter which side is which, or that the claims are tremendously large. Would you just, I think I can answer the question, but what would you recommend? And I think that's gathering, being a critical thinker, and, not just believing one source.
I think that kind of goes back into checking your bias and checking your emotions, which it's the hardest tip of all the tips to really be a considerate consumer of media, is to check those emotional responses, because these are written to make you feel one way or the other, right? And the people who are writing them are really good at writing. So it's going to elicit emotional responses from you. And I would just say, if something is sensational and evoking a really strong emotional response, step back before you click share, and also read beyond the headline, because oftentimes what the headline says and what the article actually talks about are 2 very different things. And oftentimes I look at the article and I'm like, that really is wildly different than what the headline made me think this story was about. So first of all, I think when it comes to really sensational headlines, read beyond that headline. The journalist is trying to pack a punch there in as few words and as powerful words as possible. That's neither good nor bad. It is just what it is. Headlines are meant to be attention grabbing. So we read the story. So just be conscious of that, conscious of what your personal bias is. And that's so hard to do, because a lot of the implicit bias, it is subconscious. And again, like I said, as a human, we seek confirmation bias. It's just how we are as people. We want to read things that reconfirm that our beliefs are true. But as someone who is trying to evaluate an information source, looking at the facts is so important, and finding out what the actual facts are. So again, I'm just going to go back to what I've been saying. Critically evaluate the source. If something is making you really emotional, just take some time, step back from it. That can be really hard. Maybe go off social media for a while, and then just do your research. Okay, if this is the sensational headline from this source, check out at least 3 other sources, major news outlets, check out those fact-checking sites, and see what other information is being presented. And if it's conflicting, that's a red flag. That's a red flag that's telling you, okay, this news analysis is spinning this, so it's telling a totally different story. This is not accurate information. This is not what the actual facts are saying. And again, facts are facts. Facts are facts are facts. They don't change. How the news analysis spins them changes. But the facts at the end of the day are what really and truly matter in a story. And whether you like them or not, that's up for debate, but the facts themselves are not. So really try to dig deeper and find out what the truth of the story is. And sometimes that is a little more difficult to do, especially when it does evoke such a powerful emotional response. So yep. Stick to the tools that we talked about and be critical and try to separate yourself from that emotion.
Definitely. Another compliment for you from Todd and Lori Lutz. They loved the presentation.
Thanks.
The next comment that was made is it's on the long side. And also, I can't read the entire thing, not because I am intentionally doing so, but only so many characters get fed through to me. But it does make an interesting point. I wanted what you had to say on this. Kelly Peters says, there is a bias to be found in all information resources. Be wary of all cited sources. Dig deep into the source's financing. Is the scientific paper tied to grants from corporate entities that have an interest in the study's outcome? Even seemingly neutral organizations can have a connection to big business. Dig deep. One aside, the early days of the internet had many different types of search engines, and search results would come in page numbers in the thousands. That's where I can't pass along any more of the comment. But, I can add to this just a little bit. I used to do research on vintage and antique advertising posters. And that last statement is absolutely correct. There were an array of choices that you could choose from. And now it is shrunken. So, I think this is different language than what you've been using, but it's essentially at its heart the same thing. Don't trust anything on face value.
Yeah, absolutely. And be curious. I mean, when I talked about, considering the source and digging to the mission, absolutely. Kelly sounds like a very curious person who does their research. So way to go. And again, for information, if you would like a good source of information that has those vetted sources, I recommend the databases. Again, kind of going back to the databases, it's a really great place to start. They're vetted, they're peer reviewed. They can be a wonderful source of information. But I completely agree. Don't take a source at face value. Just because someone cites their source doesn't mean the source is a good source. And there's information, as we know, can be very complex. And I agree. Dig deep, find out what the source is, and keep being curious and keep doing your research. So again, I'm going to promote the databases. They're a wonderful source of information. And if you're curious about doing research with the databases available at Manitowoc Library, you could go to manitowoclibrary.org. I believe you can go to manitowoclibrary.org/databases. Or if you check out our website under research, you'll be able to find the tab of databases and go crazy. I love Badger Link. It's wonderful.
Both of the things you just said will get you where you want to go to get to the databases. So
awesome.
Good work. Couple more comments, and then we're really up against time.
Oh yeah. Oh my gosh, time flies when you're having fun. Research is so much fun.
It really does. Sherry wanted to say, very useful presentation, Julia. Thanks for doing this. Yeah. And then Patty also said, thank you, Julia and MPL, for the dissemination of this information. Perfect timing, as she's been dealing with posts on a group page that she admins that have full of fake news. So
I'm so glad it's helpful. Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you, Patty.
So let me quickly thank you everyone who joined in and made your comments tonight. Sorry that we couldn't get to all of them. much like any of these presentations that we've been having, they could go on a long time. So thank you, people, for sticking with it. Thank you for being involved with it. Let me just quickly scroll my email address, and that is tkaczynski@manitowoc.org. You can go ahead and send an email to me. Just request the PowerPoint for tonight's presentation, and I will very happily send it to you. And thank you, Julia, for this great informative presentation this evening. But because I have you here, I was wondering if I could get you to speak a little bit about another program that we have coming up, just as a taste for people. And it's something that I know that you're involved in. Let me bring this up, and then I will stop blathering and let you actually talk about it. It is a great program that we have coming up really in just a couple of weeks. And
Absolutely.
that is the following.
Ta-da! We're very excited to announce that we are going to have an art display at Manitowoc Public Library that is called Among Friends, an Introduction to Hmong Culture. So on display are going to be traditional Hmong clothing, photography, and cultural items. It's going to be beautiful. We're going to have 4 large story cloths hanging from our balcony. So it's really highlighting and celebrating Hmong culture. And as you know, I believe Hmong Culture Day was designated May 14th by Mayor Nichols. And so we had been planning on doing this art display beforehand, and it just ended up lining up perfectly. So it's going to be on display May 17th through June 14th. It's going to be wonderful. We're going to have all the art on display on our main floor. And we're also going to have a Hmong Culture Night for a family activity night on June 1st. That does require registration. We are going to have in-person programs. It's going to be, on the smaller side, just because we got to still be careful about how many people are gathering. But we are having an in-person program June 1st at 5 o'clock. For more information, you can go on our website for registration. We will also be live streaming the program because, it's going to be pretty popular. So there's going to be Hmong dancing, Hmong story time, and some activities for the whole family. So we're going to have Hmong Culture Night June 1st, and then we are going to have our art display going on from May 17th through June 14th. We hope you can stop on in to Manitowoc Public Library and discover and celebrate Hmong culture with us.
Well, thank you for that brief plug about that great program that we have coming up. And I love that it's split into 2 parts. There's the month-long exhibition and then the Hmong Culture Night, just a celebration of Hmong culture. And it's fantastic. Thank you for helping put this together, Julia. Just wanted to also mention, we got a quick comment at the end, which was asking, would tonight's presentation, fact versus fake, will that be viewable on either of the platforms, on either YouTube or Facebook? And the answer is yes. Shortly after, just a couple minutes after we finish tonight, you can head to the videos page on Manitowoc Public Library's Facebook page, which is www.facebook.org/Manitowoc Library, and that it will be archived on there. Click in the videos and it will be the first thing that's there. And it's also available on our YouTube page as well. So if you did miss part of it, if you want to recommend it to people, it will be there for a good long time. I would like to say infinity, but that might be overstated. I don't know, but close to infinity anyhow.
We'll work on it. We'll try.
Exactly. Well, thank you everyone for attending tonight. Thank you again, Julia, for a wonderful presentation. And thank you everyone. Come to the library. Enjoy the library in person and online. There are so many things. There's so much information. So please take advantage of it. Have a great night, and we will see you next time. Bye, everyone.